Welcome to the Program in Criminal Justice weekly session on Reimagining Community Safety. I am Chris Winship, a professor in sociology and also the senior faculty at the Kennedy School. And it is my honor and pleasure today to introduce my good friend, Lisa Holmes. Lisa is a recently retired Boston Police Superintendent. At that time, she was the highest ranking female in the Boston Police Department. At the time of her retirement, she was responsible for all the BPD's training activities and was head of the Boston Academy. During her tenure as head of the Academy, she instituted many changes and reforms, something she will talk about today. Superintendent Holmes began her career with the BPD in 1983. During her tenure, she has served in and been headed many numerous units, including, to give you a sense of the breadth of her experience, the Anti-Gang Violence Unit, now known as the Youth Violence Strike Force, the Sexual Assault Unit, the Homicide Unit, the BPD FBI Task Force on Human Trafficking, and she's supervisor of the Grove Hall Safe Street Team, and in the Internal Investigation Unit. Superintendent Holmes has received many awards for her community work and for her bravery in action, but perhaps her most treasured distinction was the opportunity to introduce then President William Jefferson Clinton at a major public safety event at the Orchard Gardens housing development where she grew up. Lifelong resident of Boston, Superintendent Holmes received her bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Curry College, a master's degree in counseling psychology from Northeastern, a graduate certificate in public safety leadership and management from Suffolk University, Moakley Center for Public Management. She is currently and has been a lecturer at the University of Massachusetts Harvard campus in their criminal justice program, and is vice chair of the Shelburne Community Council in Roxbury. Throughout her career, BPD Superintendent Holmes has been a strong supporter of community policing and a proponent of a guardian as opposed to warrior model of policing. In her various roles, and most importantly as the head of the Boston Police Academy, she's developed many new training initiatives both for police and young people. As noted by a former BPD commissioner, these efforts predated by many years many of the changes that people across the country are currently calling for. Please welcome Superintendent Holmes.
How do I top that?
Well, Superintendent, I suspect that many of our viewers know little about police training. All I know is basically from you. Could you start us off by describing its various elements?
Well, the road to getting to the police training is a long one. And once you even reach the training level, you've gone through at least 12 to 18 months of a rigorous interviewing process, which includes civil service testing, background checks, psychological exams, physical exams. And by the time you reach the academy, that 18 months of commitment you have put in is now going to come to fruition. And now Police Academy, at least for Boston, it's 29 weeks or a little shy of 6 months. And within that time, it is told that the amount of law and academic education you receive is more than a law student receives in their first 2 years of law school. So it's a lot of intense work and could be longer. There are things that we could do more, that we had more time. Community engagement is something that I think we really could spend a lot more time on with officers, but in the essence of time and needing to get officers out and into the beat, 6 months is usually the maximum that the state will allow us to hold an academy.
Could you talk about what's going to happen? What happens in those 6 months? I've just walked in through the door of the academy.
Well, it's intense. I will tell you, it is not an experience for everyone. You know, just like with any profession, it takes a certain type of person to become a law enforcement officer. It's not easy by any means, and it really takes nerves of steel. So usually within the first 2 weeks of entering an academy, a recruit will really know if this is actually the profession for them. You see, not a lot, but you do see some recruits who decide after 1 week in the academy that it's really not the profession for them. The thought and the idolization of what people think being a police officer actually is and what it entails are two very distinctly different things. And sometimes people have a very idolized image of law enforcement and being a police officer. Just about everyone who goes into the field of law enforcement does it because they want to do good for their communities, they want to help somebody, but they never really think about what it takes to get to the end game. So it consists of very rigorous physical training, physical education, which takes up the majority of their mornings. We start our academy at the crack of 7:30 in the morning, and we run anywhere up until 5 p.m. every night with an hour break for lunch, and that's really about it. In those 8 to 8.5 hours in that day, we've probably crammed in at least 4 or 5 different subjects. And, you know, it's very intense. It's very intense. Each of the instructors in the academy are subject matter experts in their area. They're highly trained. They're certified by the state every year to keep up their certifications to teach. I will say that the Municipal Police Training Committee is a stickler for that, and they are really good at ensuring that our instructors stay up to par. And a lot of our instructors also will go on and take courses on their own to boost their knowledge of what they do. The academies usually run from December until June. And the officers who are assigned there as instructors usually take the summer months to go on and get additional training in their skill set so they can be at the top of their game when we bring our recruits in.
So there's been a lot of public discussion, complaints, concern about police use of force. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of the use of force training that recruits go through?
Well, I can only speak for Boston. Every jurisdiction is different. What each jurisdiction mandates for their recruit training is much different. I will tell you, Boston goes above and beyond what is required by the state as far as use of force. I have my numbers here, so let me bring them up and not try to figure it out. I have so many charts here, so it's going to give me a minute to find the hours. Okay. So use of force is broken down into many different components. When people think of use of force, most people who are not in law enforcement think of use of force as firearm use. And use of force is a continuum of a threat that is given towards a police officer. So the way use of force is taught, an officer cannot return an amount of force more than what was presented to them. So if you're yelling at me, I cannot strike you. That's not an equal use of force. If you strike me, I can subdue you, but still, I should not strike you back. Police officers, at least here in Massachusetts and Boston, are trained to use as much restraint as reasonably possible before they resort to using physical force on a person. Now, does that mean that an officer should stand there and get his brains knocked out? No. But we teach methods that an officer can use the least amount of force necessary to protect themselves and to an effect an arrest on a violent suspect. So you said for use of force, it's contains so many things. It would be defensive tactics and de-escalation training. That's 62 hours of training alone, just on de-escalation and defensive tactics. By defensive tactics, I mean tactics that officers can use to diffuse a situation, to block any hits or abuse to them. So that 62 hours, I don't think there are many other departments in Massachusetts that give that much de-escalation and defensive tactics training to their officers. It also, use of force also we incorporate crisis intervention and conflict resolution skills. How do we talk suspects down from being violent? It's the way we teach body language. How do you use your body? How do you stance to diffuse a situation? Sometimes just the way you present yourself can agitate a situation. Hands on your weapon, hands on your waist, things like that. We try to teach our officers to keep a neutral stance with their hands, maybe hold their hands in front of them crossed. Never like this. This shows anger. So different types of ways to try to diffuse a situation without even speaking. Your facial tone, your facial, the way your face looks. Me, I would probably have a problem with that. My face says everything that my mouth does not. But we have to teach our officers how to do that. The way, the tone in your voice, your tonation. One of the greatest skills that I like is when somebody is really loud and agitated, is that you start talking lower and lower and lower and lower, forcing them to have to kind of bring their tone down so they can hear what you're saying. Because if they're yelling and you're yelling back, we're never going to get this situation diffused. So if somebody's really agitated, just let them talk. A lot of times people just want to vent. They just want to vent. They just want somebody to listen to them. Let them vent, let them get it out, just let them keep yelling, and you just, quietly calm them down with your voice. And usually that can bring the situation to a point where now we can have a conversation. Not always does it work, but most times it does.
So police often encounter situations that are challenging with people who are having mental health issues.
Mm-hmm.
What's the nature of mental health training in the BPD Academy?
Well, it's not as much as it should be, but people should also remember that police officers are not clinicians. They're not capable of doing the same type of diffusion that a clinical psychologist or a clinician can do on scene. So what they get, I'm trying to figure if I can find it here, because it's been 2 years since I've been there, so I can't really remember offhand. I would, if I'm looking at this, I would give or take, it may be about 30 to 40 hours of training on mental health, which is really not enough. But we do we bring in people from NAMI to come in and train the officers on how to try to diffuse a situation. I will tell you, our officers do a great job with what they have to work with. And, the one thing about working in an urban setting and officers who are from the community and from their neighborhoods, most people have had to deal with someone in their family with a mental health issue. So in that respect, some are able to relate to how to speak to people who are dealing with mental health issues. Some officers are not good at it. And that's just like anything. Some officers are just not good, whether they're not comfortable with themselves in dealing with these situations, or they're just like, everybody doesn't have a lot of patience. I mean, we're human beings. We're all born with different skill sets. And you really have to have a lot of patience, and some people just don't have it. And another thing, a person that's going through a mental health episode is very scary, even to a police officer. And you're afraid to say or do the wrong thing and make the situation even worse. But with the training that they're given, and with the hopes that we're very fortunate that we have a great EMS system in Boston that's usually there to help us, you know, within a few minutes. But, you know, they get, like I said, they probably get about 40 hours of training in mental health issues, but it's not enough. It's not enough. And it's very unfair for society to expect police officers to be clinicians. Yes, we can try to diffuse a situation the best we can, but you know, you have to decide what role you want the police to play in your community. And I think it's unfair to ask us to play both enforcer and clinician.
Okay. So certainly an important part of police training is about the use of guns. It relates to what the policies that a police department has. And I can remember you telling me once a lot about scenario training and how that's done at the academy. And I found it fascinating. I'm sure others would too.
Well, firearms training is 86 educational hours. So it's the majority of after their midterm, it takes up the majority of their training. The last part of it, which is only maybe 4 weeks, is actually spent training with an actual firearm. The first part of it is all classroom work. It's classroom work. It's learning how to, we have, they're like electronic weapons that they train with. And they're like buzzers. So if they put their finger on the trigger when they're not supposed to, it buzzes to tell them that they've made a mistake. If they pull it in a situation where they're not supposed to, it goes off. So we train them with the practice guns for the majority of the time while they're in the academy, and they only get their real weapons after they have successfully completed all the classroom training, the virtual training, the situational training. It's called FATS, but I can't think of what the acronym stands for. But it's situational training where their weapons, they're put into a room with a simulator and they're given different scenarios and they have to react as they would have to on the street. In Boston, a police officer is only allowed to pull their weapon in defense of their life or the life of another. There is no other reason that a police officer should pull his gun. You don't pull it to shoot warning shots. You don't pull it to threaten people. If you pull your weapon, you must know that you are in a situation where you are ready to use it if necessary.
Yeah, I can remember you telling me you didn't get to graduate until you had the right response and muscle memory.
Right.
And
it becomes just part of you don't even realize what you're doing. Most police officers, when they get into a situation like that, they actually just resort to training. They just go back into what they were trained, and it's almost like they're watching themselves from the inside out. They really are, they know what they're doing, but they're working from muscle memory on their training and what they were taught.
so let me ask you to speculate for a minute, and I know it's difficult to get you to speculate, but we've seen lots of incidents over the years where police have pulled out their weapons to threaten people, to demand compliance. Is this just a misuse, or is this kind of they haven't gotten the right training,
Are you
or
talking about Boston or other places?
other places?
I wouldn't be able to comment on that without knowing what their training is, because each, like I said, every jurisdiction has a different rule for use of force or firearms use. So what I am speaking of here is only for Boston police, but every other place could have a different use of force for their weapons, which is probably part of the problem in this country, is that we don't have one national training standard for all police officers.
I wonder if my co-organizer, Sandra Smith, would like to ask some questions.
I would love to ask some questions. Lisa, it's wonderful to have you here. Thank you for agreeing to join us. And also, I suspect I'm going to have questions well beyond today's session, so you and I should keep in touch.
We will.
About my understanding about things. So a couple of things, and I want to get through so that the folks in the audience can ask their questions. A couple of things have come up for me. A lot of the conversation so far has been about use of force. But racial inequities at the hands of by police, it looks a lot of different ways, right? And so if I were to just kind of review the news in the Boston area over the last few months, maybe a couple of years, I'm fairly new, so most of my knowledge is based on what has come up in the recent past. There's stories about driving while Black. 25% of Boston population is Black. 70% of those who are pulled over are Black. Racial disparities in the courts. There was a recent report coming out of Harvard Law School that indicated that, there's just these huge disparities that exist that can't be explained by all the factors that we tend to think about. A poll that shows that Bostonians perceive police as not treating Blacks equally. And the police force has gotten whiter over time as the population has gotten blacker and browner, if I can say that. So it's not really just about force. Even if we were to put force aside, there are all these other things that are happening. So this, of course, makes us think, is something going on with training? Is it about the people who are coming into the police academy? Training does some things, but people still have their kind of individual characteristics, and training can't beat everything out of you, right? Or is it about socialization that happens once you become a police officer? The organization itself shapes behaviors in ways that might produce some of these, I think, even if we don't consider force, very troubling outcomes. So how do we make sense of this, given all of the factors that are potentially at play here?
Well, I would have to disagree with some of what you just said, because I would like to know who are the people who feel that they are unfairly targeted by the police in Boston, because when you walk through the communities, you don't get that same response from community people towards police. The people who actually live in the city and in the communities love and have a great working relationship with police officers in Boston. Now, of course, the people who have run-ins who maybe fall on the left side of the law, of course, they're going to have a bad opinion of the police. But the majority of citizens who live in the Black community, Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan, have an amazing connection with the officers that work in their communities. And you will hear them tell people clearly, we want our police officers. We love our police officers. They work with them. They sit on boards with them. So I'm very curious to know where that information comes from.
Yeah, we can share the poll with you that came out. This would have been about 2-3 years ago, that indicated that the majority of Bostonians think that the police, whether white or Black, think that the police do not treat Blacks equally. In some ways, it's not surprising if we also have research coming out to show that there are these disparities that exist in different, aspects of policing. So
I know Northeastern did a study a few years ago, and I know they were talking about the motor vehicle stops and the FIOs. And when you looked at the units who were responsible for writing those, they were the units who actually worked in the higher crime areas, which unfortunately happened to be in the Black community. So I kind of think it depends on where they're getting their statistical information from.
Yeah, I mean, it could be, and we should look at that. My knowledge of these kinds of studies indicate often when Blacks are pulled over, they're less likely to have contraband on them than whites. And so this is often, they are often targeted in part because they are Black. And we see disparities that exist in the courts. We see disparities that exist with regards to sentencing. So it seems like the disparities start from the beginning to the end and not just a function. I mean,
I agree with you that there are some disparities in the criminal justice system. I'm not going to not disagree with you on that. And there's room for improvement all around.
So then the question is, where do we look? And that gets me back to the question that I asked. Are we talking about the kinds of individuals who come into the police force? Is it in part that the training still needs to be kind of adjusted so as to produce better outcomes, so there aren't these inequities that exist? Or is it something that's happening once people join the police forces? There's something that's going on within the context of the organization, whether it's socialization or the various rules that produce the kinds of outcomes that we're seeing.
You know, I don't even think I can answer that, because human nature and human behavior is something that we really can't get a handle on. And, you know, in some instances, no matter how well you train a person or how much education you give a person, what their inherent beliefs are always going to come to the forefront, which is why I instituted implicit bias training with recruits and community engagement, because for the most part, and I will say this about Boston, for the most part, as progressive as we are, the city is still pretty much segregated. People live in their communities with people of their same kind, for the most part. We do have a lot of gentrification and unification, but for the most part, people grow up with people who look like them. So if you've never interacted with somebody other than your peers or your cohorts, this is a whole new world. And what is normal for one family, you know, for one culture and one family, is not normal for everyone else. So in order for us to police outside of our own biases, we have to learn about other people and other cultures and other things. Because a police officer may go into a situation and completely misconstrue what's going on because it's cultural. And it's not, like, for instance, there are some cultures, and I'll just use myself for an example. As a sergeant, sometimes I had a hard time with other cultures because females are not respected as an authority figure. And so you have to learn how to understand that and not turn that situation, not escalate that situation into something that it's not. A man of another nationality may not talk to me because in his culture, women don't represent authority figures. But as a police officer, I could get, you know, my panties in a bunch and get upset because this person isn't listening to me. But knowing the culture, I could just not overreact to that, and then maybe have to bring in a male who this man will talk to. So we have to teach our officers the differences in cultures and, you know, what not to really overreact to. So, I mean, and like I said, police officers, just like everybody else, they come from the human race. You know, there are teachers who aren't the best. There are doctors, you know, everybody has their own biases based on their life story. And what I tried to teach was that we have to look outside of our own life story and put ourselves in the shoes of the citizens that we're out there trying to protect.
Yeah.
Could I jump in a question, Sandra, that you were asking and asked the superintendent? Talk a little bit about sort of how people are recruited into the police department, who is given priority. I know that, you know, this is certainly a factor in why the police department has become more white.
Okay, yeah, thank you, because Sandra asked me so many questions, I couldn't remember all of them. Well, first of all, anybody who aspires to be a police officer in Massachusetts, with the exception of a few cities and towns, must take a Massachusetts civil service exam. Civil service is a state agency, and the Civil Service Commission designates who goes into the police academies. Veterans have 100% first option. So anybody who has served in any branch of the military goes to the top of the list of any police exam, and they get first choice into an academy, which Sandra answers the question of why the police departments have gone more white when the community is turning to more people of color. At one point back up until I think the late 80s, we had a consent decree which mandated that at least, I don't know if it was all police departments in Massachusetts, but I know it was the Boston Police Department, had to hire police officers 1 for 1. So 1 minority, 1 white candidate. That ran out, and once that ran out, we had to go exactly by civil service requirements, which state that all veterans go to the head of the class. And so with knowing that, I mean, a lot of kids, both Caucasian and minorities, go into the service just to get that status to become police officers.
Okay, so that actually helps a lot in terms of helping me to make this transition. You mentioned empathy earlier. So it sounds like in part the way that you shifted, the way that you trained was by training them in a way that might enhance empathy. So your police officers could see maybe from the perspective of the folks that they are hired to protect and serve, what their needs are, what their issues, how they might see the world. And so making this distinction, it reminds me of this kind of guardian versus warrior distinction that folks have been making a lot over the past few months to describe different ways of that police might imagine their roles. And so, you know, I've been paying attention to some of the research that's been done on how to kind of change officers so that they don't take on the warrior mentality. Instead, they kind of embrace the guardian, and that sounds like what you have tried to do. I'm wondering, and forgive me again for the compound questions, when you recruit former soldiers, is it more difficult to get them to retrain them so they're not thinking that, you know, I am fighting against this alien force?
No, I think that's a misconception, because first of all, most of our men and women who go into the military, a lot of them never see combat. You know, we do have some who spend some time, you know, in some bad places, but no, and I don't see that they have that mentality at all. Actually, it's quite the opposite, because if you talk to people who have been in places like Fallujah, in places where they've seen a lot of devastation, they're very empathetic to the communities that they serve, because they know what strife and what a war-torn place looks like. So I don't think that's a really good depiction of, you know, people who serve in the military. I really don't see that.
Mm-hmm. So thank you for clarifying. It's one of the conversations that seems like.
And another thing, I just want to, you say recruit. We call our student officers recruits, but we don't really recruit people. They come to us. They decide they want to be police officers.
Okay, thank
We
you.
might do a campaign if we're looking to hire more women, or we're looking to hire people with language skills. We may go out and do recruitment in places that might garner us some candidates like that. But for the most part, we really don't recruit. The last time we did a really big recruitment drive, and I was actually part of it, it was because we were trying to hire women and people with languages.
Okay. So my final question, and this is about the rulings by the Supreme Judicial Court. So there have been 3 over the last, say, 2-3 weeks or so that I think would have a bearing on how police are trained. I'm just going to list them out for you, and then I would love to hear what impact you think it might have on training. One of the rulings is that has the implications that it will broaden the circumstances in which Black motorists may argue that racial profiling by police led to a traffic stop, right? A second ruling is that because of historic mistrust of police by Black people, police may no longer use certain kinds of, I can't even see my, nervous behaviors as indications of suspicious activity. You might be nervous because you're Black and you know how police can treat you, is my interpretation. And then the third ruling is that a person may pursue a lawsuit against police alleging civil rights violations, even if the person has been convicted of the crime arising from the incident. So
Are these Massachusetts rulings?
yeah, that's right. And they often point to the disparities that exist in policing outcomes as a reason for why we need to be careful, why we need to give kind of broader consideration with a specific focus on the experience of Black residents.
I'm not familiar with those rulings, so I really, I'm not quite sure how you want me to answer this.
Well, I was wondering if you had thoughts about how it might impact how police are trained.
Well, I mean, the profiling, first of all, when we talk about racial profiling and we talk about, we got to go all the way back to society. Society has deemed Black and brown people as the boogeyman for years. So if you come from a very homogenous background and now you have been socialized to always see Black and brown people as the enemy, it's going to take a lot to get that thought process out of your mind, because that's what you were raised with. And it takes, and it can happen because it takes a good experience with somebody of the opposite race in order for you to change your perception, which is why I made sure that the recruits spent at least a week or 2, if I could get it, out in the community with people other than themselves, so they would get to know the communities that they were going to be working with before we put them in a uniform and sent them out with full police powers. I wanted them to get acclimated and turn their thought process exactly away from what you're saying, Sandra. So you would get to see that people of other races aren't bad, that we're all inherently the same. You know, some of us just have a little more melanin or a little less. I would bring young people in from some of the communities, from the DYS facilities, to have roundtable talks with the recruits so they could get to see that all young people aren't bad. Sometimes kids make bad choices, but they're not bad. And to see, so they could each get to see each other on a non-threatening level and learn a perspective about each other that they would probably never get. And they would just come into a classroom, we'd split them up, maybe 20 people to a room, 10 recruits, 10 kids, and we would just spend the day talking. The kids would tell, you know, what their perception of policing are, and the police would, you know, share their thoughts. And by the end of the week, you know, they had some of the greatest relationships, because you have to get to know somebody before you can change those thought processes.
Thank you very much. Chris, do you want to open it up?
Yeah, let's open it up. Brian, you're going to be in charge, and let's take questions from the
Spotlight.
audience, so to speak. But thank you so much, Superintendent.
Looks like Adam Schutzman has a question.
Hi, yes. Thank you, first off, for being here and speaking with us this afternoon. I greatly appreciate that. It's definitely been incredibly informative. I wanted to go off a point that you made earlier when you were talking about kind of mental health training and things like that. And something that you said is at the end of the day, police officers aren't mental health professionals. It seems that one of the big pushes of the defund the police movement today is this argument, right? Police are not mental health professionals, substance abuse counselors, domestic abuse counselors, anything like that. And so I wanted to know, what are your thoughts on the defund the police movement and the idea of diverting some of those funds towards different actions that or different organizations that might be better equipped to handle some of society's,
Well,
problems?
personally, and listening to a lot of police officers that are still out there working, they welcome taking some of these hats off of their shoulders. A few years ago when, so just as we're having this push now to defund the police, because we're not mental health and we're not DV, a few years ago, the push was the other way, and they wanted us to do all this, which is, in my opinion, why we're where we're at to this day. Because they place too much responsibility on police officers. Society has placed so much responsibility on police officers to be everything, to be the warrior, to be the guardian, to be the mental health worker, to be the teacher, to be the mother, to be everything. Society has asked police officers to be everything to everybody. And at some point, it was going to break. Police officers, like I said, they only go to the academy for 6 months. In that 6 months, they are required to learn and train so much. I am a trained clinician, and that took 6 years. So you cannot expect a police officer to have the real skill set they need to diffuse that type of situation. And so here we are today, where now they want to defund the police because finally it has been shown that the police can't be everything.
Thank you.
I hope that, did that help?
Yes, it definitely did answer my question. Thank you.
We have a question from Madeleine Smith, I think.
Hi. This is building off of Adam's question, actually. So given sort of Boston's ecosystem and various other agencies or nonprofit groups that sort of overlap with policing, are there specific groups that are highlighted as part of training? And do you think that style of training at the beginning is effective in sort of the creating a guardian versus warrior mindset? And then I have a second question, if there's time, around like remedial training if there are issues, but get to that later.
I don't quite understand, Madeleine, the first part of your question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So for example, if there's a partnership with an organization like Boys and Girls Clubs of Boston, would they come into training and give a pitch, or what onboarding to the Boston social service sector is there?
We work very closely with the Boys and Girls Clubs. As a matter of fact, our social workers that work in some of our stations are through the Boys and Girls Club. So we do work with them extensively. Most of the officers that work in our districts have a relationship with the community centers and the youth centers in their neighborhoods, so they build their relationships. And I wouldn't say we have them come in to do a pitch because we'd never get out the academy, but we do give the recruits like a list of resources and places in the community that they can refer families to, or if they see like a child in need, that where they can find resources for children and for families. So I guess yes is the answer to your first part of your question. We do work very closely with community organizations.
Got it.
What was the
Um,
second part?
Second part, if it's clear during the training process that a recruit is not a fit, so you're training on use of force continuum and they're not getting it, are there processes in place to flag that or offboard the recruit?
Well, we can, we flag it, we'll see it. We'll see it through testing. We'll see it through training. So every week, not only do they have written tests, they also have actual scenario testing. So everything we learned that week, we put it into a practicum and they practice it. If we start to see deficiencies in, what we're teaching, then we'll bring that recruit to the side. We'll do some remedial. But like I said, sometimes this is not a job for everybody, and we may have to tell that they're just not going to pass, and this is not for you. And that has happened. We've had to sadly, let some recruits go because they just were not grasping the skill set.
Deanza Cook, do you have a question?
Hi, yes. Thank you so much, Miss Lisa. It's great to to see you from so far away. I'm doing well. My question kind of speaks to kind of your larger legacy on the BPD, because I know we've had lots of conversations about the role, often understated role of Black police officers and Black police administrators who've been trying to work, in the background and sometimes in leadership to push a lot of these reforms forward. And so I wanted to ask you, kind of, in your opinion, what role do both Black police officers, so the new recruits, but also administrators and leadership, what role can they play in this new phase of police reform? And then the second question being, to the extent that you feel comfortable sharing, what do you think have been some of the biggest barriers for those police officers of color who've been arguing for a lot of the things that you've been sharing with us today?
Well, as far as police reform, I have to say, and I'm going to brag on Boston, all these reforms that they're trying to push through the country, we started these about 4 years ago. So we're already ahead of the game with a lot of this, and it's not new information. All of these things, or a lot of them, came out of President Obama's 21st century policing. And so that was back probably in 2000, maybe 14, or around 2012, 14. So a lot of these reforms are not new. A lot of police departments did not enact them because, one, it was costly, and two, maybe they just didn't feel the need to do it. And how can Black officers, how can first of all, we have to be, as Black officers, we wear two hats. We represent an industry that is inherently had strife with all communities, but particularly communities of color. So one, we represent a faction that has never really been embraced. And then we have to find a way to coexist in communities that don't really trust the police. And I will say, here in Boston, I think we have navigated that very well. We have bridged that gap. Again, is it perfect? No, nothing's perfect. Are there still people who have resentment towards law enforcement? Yes, and there's always going to be. One thing as a police officer you learn, you cannot please everybody, and to try to will kill you. So you must do what you are required to do by law with the least amount of disruption to a community. And so that's where the community engagement between officers and community members. Sometimes in order to quell a disturbance, police officers have to go to the person who's the head of that community, or maybe somebody who's really respected, and sit down and have a talk with them to try to bridge the gap and bring everybody together. So, and I wouldn't just hold that to Black police officers. I would say all police officers, because it doesn't matter what color you are as an officer, you have to work everywhere in a city with everybody. So as police officers, we have to find ways to navigate that negativity and find somebody who can bring us all together to have a sit down. And you said barriers?
Yes, ma'am. Because a lot of the things, like you said, that people are bringing up and the kind of the critiques of police are things that we've been talking about since the 60s. And at least in my research on the history of policing, the early kind of generation of Black police leaders like yourself have been arguing for community policing reforms for a long time. So I guess kind of what sort of resistance have you experienced personally, or kind of what do you see kind of on the macro level resistance to these sorts of community policing reforms that we know lots of officers of color already agree with?
Well, one thing I will say about the profession of policing, it is entrenched in history, and because we've always done it this way, why do we need to change it? And I will say in the last maybe 10 to 15 years, you have seen that dichotomy kind of shift, because, you know, you can only bang your head up against a brick wall for so long. And you got to realize, you know, what is the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. So you really have to start to embrace some new thinking. And I think back maybe 10, 15 years ago, we had some really innovative leaders, some commissioners who were willing to go against the normal ingrained thought process that law enforcement tends to have, and really institute some new and innovative programming, and, you know, really just going back to the basics, because community policing is nothing more than the officer who used to walk the beat in one neighborhood every day and learn about the people in their community. And when we went back to the basics, got officers out of their vehicles and connecting with the community and with citizens, we started to see the change. So this change that you're seeing in Boston it did not happen overnight. It started probably in the early 90s, when, you know, our gang problems here was so bad. We were losing 160, 170 young people a year to gang violence. And we had to do something to stop that. We had to try to stop that. And what we did was basically just real old-fashioned boots on the ground type of interventions with kids. You know, I used to go sit on the block with gang members and just talk to them to find out, you know, what's going on. And then when you start to listen and find out that, you know, there's problems at home, there's dysfunction at home, you know, there's food insecurity, there's financial insecurity, there's domestic violence and mental health. And you start to try to see now why children are acting out is because they're living in disarray. So in order to fix that problem, you've got to fix the backstory.
Thank you so much.
I think we have a question from, hope I pronounced it right, Gerben?
Yes, that was right. Thank you, Lisa. I really enjoyed the conversation on training today. And I didn't go through BPD's academy, but through one in Arizona.
I was going to say, you look like a police officer.
I don't know whether that's a compliment or not, but I think one thing to talk about a little bit more is the emphasis on field training. And for me, the amount that I learned in the field was like, I learned the correct way in the academy, but then the tone really gets set in field training. And I think that's something to really emphasize. But my question for you was actually more on, and maybe for some other experts in this room, is what it would look like to spend more time educating young people and citizens on their rights. I think a more informed citizenry would be probably a safer citizenship. And I think especially around what are the rights you have when you engage with police officers, what do you have to provide and what do you not have to provide. And I think there's some background for this in that we train all young people in how to react to a fire alarm and do fire drills, but most young people only learn how to interact with police officers from their parents, maybe.
Right.
And I think that means that a lot of people don't have a lot of information about what their rights are, and I think that can sometimes lead to situations that get really dangerous.
Well, we used to run Citizens Academy, but, you know, due to budget constraints, we had to, you know, stop those. And that was exactly the type of thing we were trying to do, was to teach citizens, or just to give them a bird's eye view of, you know, what their rights are, what police have a right to do, what citizens have rights to do. And that used to go very well. It used to be a weekly thing, and they were very well received and very well attended. But due to manpower constraints and money, we had to stop. But we do still run a teen academy every summer. And that's exactly what the Teen Academy does. It introduces young people to the field or career of law enforcement. And we talk about engaging with police officers and what things, you know, they shouldn't do, and what rights they have and what rights police have. So you're absolutely right. Those things, they're very good tools to use to get the police and citizens to understand what each other's role is in this whole thing.
I think we have a question from Arif.
Actually, before Arif, Anne Jordan and Brenda Bond-Fortier have had questions in the queue for since the beginning.
Okay.
So Anne Jordan.
I need to understand the Zoom stuff better then.
Hi, Ms. Holmes. I'm Ann Jordan from Maine. In the last 10 to 15 years, there seems to have been a discussion and debate between the styles of police academies, one being basically a book university-based academy, and then you go forward and learn the other stuff once you go out with your FTO. And the second being more of a stress academy with the muscle memory training and then some FTO. Do you have an opinion on how the differences in those kinds of trainings impacts officers' responses to people, and in particular their responses to use of force in stressful situations?
Well, I can only speak on my academy because that's the only one I know. And our academy is a combination of everything you've just said.
Mm-hmm.
It's everything. And I actually, in my personal opinion, I don't think you can do one without the other. I don't see how just training an officer on the tactics and without giving the educational component or the FTO, I don't see how that makes a well-rounded police officer, because you're really only giving them one side of the training. And all the academic training you give them, you also must give them the opportunity to put it into practice, to learn how to do this, because we can sit academically and talk about de-escalation, and you can read all the words and you can check the right box off. But if you can't actually put those skills into practice in a situation, then it doesn't make for the best training for a police officer. So we give them the academics, we give them the scenario-based training, then they still have to do the FTO. And our FTOs are picked to be FTOs. So not every officer can be an FTO. And they get not enough training, but they get a little bit on what to do. But we usually take our best and brightest officers from every district and they become FTOs.
Okay, thank you.
Next question was for
Brenda Bond.
Brenda.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi, former professor.
It's great to see everybody. Thanks. Lisa, maybe just very briefly, from a sort of managerial supervisor perspective, what would you say we should be thinking about in terms of how managers and supervisors should be trained, given all of these new challenges and things like that?
Great question. The behavior starts from the top. So if the supervisors aren't trained in the same thing as the rank and file, then none of this is going to work. And that's I'm glad you brought that up, because nobody ever talks about supervisor training. And we do train our supervisors at well, now we're up to the lieutenant level. I think we have training for lieutenant. I know we were starting it before I left. And so everybody has to be trained on the same thing. Everybody has to buy into the same concept. So if the lieutenants, and I think this is what Gervin was talking about, like you learn one thing and then you get out and it's a whole nother scenario. So, you know, supervisors should be trained in the exact same impartial, implicit biases, and the community engagement, and the same things that we would expect from our officers. And over the last maybe 10 years, I think we've done a good job of, you know, making sure that everybody from the commissioner all the way down the roll is on the same page, and that supervisors are held accountable. If their officers are not performing up to the standards that are expected by them, then the supervisor's called in. And I think when you hold people accountable for their responsibilities, people act accordingly. And so I think that's what's helped us alleviate a lot of the situations that we're seeing across the country, particularly when we have, you know, protests and things, that everybody is on the same page. And like I said, supervisors are held accountable. They have to be trained just as everybody else. Every officer, whether they're supervisor or rank and file, everybody has to go back yearly for in-service training to the police academy on whatever's new that criminal justice, MPTC has come up, or even sometimes if I used to, if I saw trends nationwide that I thought would be beneficial for us, I would bring that in and train our officers in some of the things that I saw happening across the country, so we would not have those same problems.
I think Arif, you're up.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Lisa. I may not look like a police officer, but I actually worked at the Los Angeles Police Department as a civilian commander, and also I'm a reserve police officer with LAPD. My question is about the model and the standards that even large departments like LAPD or Boston use for training officers. You alluded to the fact that there were a lot of different jurisdictions, and I don't think people appreciate the variation among the 18,000 police departments, where at most the last 6 months, some departments don't even require an academy until the first year. It's online training, just a variety of things that would really be shocking to most. But even in the departments like yours, the first in the nation, and or LAPD or NYPD, we still use a model where it's 6 months at the most. We have people who are fairly young with wide varying educational backgrounds, which makes it difficult to teach. But more importantly, we have instructors who are typically police officers who may be very good at skills, but not good at, they're not professional educators. Because they're skills oriented, we focus so much on skills instead of critical thinking, problem solving, and so many other things in that nature. And then that's pretty much it. And then afterward, very little meaningful training and follow-up. Do you think that this current model that the policing has been doing for 50 years is still the way to deal with policing, given all the challenges that you pointed out and what's expected of them?
Well, I think, so in the long term, yes. I don't know about LA, but our instructors in our academy in Boston have to be certified by the state to be instructors. So they do get training, and they have to recertify every 2 to 3 years in their subject. So not everybody can be an instructor. And usually we get our instructors from our officer pool, from officers who have demonstrated a great skill in this particular skill set in their particular area. All of our instructors in our academy are subject matter experts, so they don't cross over and teach anybody else's class unless it's an emergency. But you know, for the most part, they are the subject matter expert, because a lot of times they also have to testify in court as to the training that they provided to an officer. I do think I do think academy instructors, for the most part, should have police experience. I am not a fan of a civilian being a police academy instructor. Maybe for something like for mental health training or something that's not law enforcement mandated. But I do believe that the model, it probably could be tweaked, but I don't know if I would be a fan of somebody who has not been in a critical situation like a police officer is to teach or train, you know, just by academics. A lot of times you need that actual experience combined with academics to be able to teach effectively in a police academy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I understand what you mean. And there are standards in Los Angeles and the state for instructors having to be certified. I'm a certified instructor as well. But what I found, I was also a law school professor. So the difference is where you have instructors who are teaching tactics, you know, firearms, different things is one thing. But because policing is requiring so much more on the sort of social science side, understanding history, human interactions, psychology, pharmacology, all of these things, I do think there's a significant gap in the ability to have the type of professional educator that policing needs, both in the academy and afterward. And I think it's a resource issue. You can't hire these people because they cost more. And it's easier to take a cop and train the trainer than it is to get a full-time educator. And I just think that's a gap that people who are involved with education would see if they had understanding of it.
Well, I have found, and now I understand what you mean. I have found that the majority, because I'm thinking it back, I wouldn't say more than half, I would think of the instructors that I had at the academy, not only were they police officers, but they also had an advanced degree in the subject they were teaching. So for instance, my criminal law instructor was an attorney. My DV instructor had a sociology degree. So I understand what you're saying, yes. And they did have some kind of background other than just law enforcement training in the subject and in the matter that they were teaching. So in that respect, yes, I can agree with, I can agree with you on that.
And just on one point on that I think is important, and that's largely because Boston and Los Angeles, many departments support officers getting either having college education or advanced degrees as part of their promotions. Right. So many cities and departments do not, and that can make a difference as well. But thank you for your answer.
Thank you.
Next question is from JL Sweeney. You need to unmute yourself. There you go.
Hi, Lisa. It's Joan.
How are you?
I'm well. Good to see you.
Lots of familiar faces here today.
Yeah, it's like old home week. My question has to do with the broader notion of reimagining policing and police training, and with an emphasis on the reimagining as opposed to defunding or the more commonly used term reforming. One of the things that has struck me in the work I've done with different police departments is there's a gap between what the executives, police managers, senior command staff are familiar with or exposed to in terms of the methods, tools, etc., more commonly used in other kinds of organizations to make change and to really substantively do that kind of work to manage change initiatives, etc. Boston, in many ways, pioneered in some of that regard in the 90s and 2000s under a couple of different commissioners, and received great national attention for that. It has not been my experience that many other departments have stretched and been willing to try methods and tools that are more commonly used for substantive or complex change initiatives. what do you think will need to happen with the culture of police organizations to crack that open a bit more? If we're going to be serious about reimagining policing, same old tweaking is not going to do it.
Right. Well, first of all, I think they have to be dedicated to training. They have to be dedicated and serious about providing the best options in training and making sure that their academies have what they need. And another thing, every jurisdiction, as I'm sure Arif will probably agree with me on this, a lot of jurisdictions don't have their own police academies.
Right.
And they have to go to regional academies.
Right.
And regional academies don't have full-time instructors. So they only bring instructors in from different departments when they have a class about to go in session, which means your instructors aren't really committed to instructing. It's just something they're doing, you know, as another gig. So I think when you have a full-time dedicated staff that's committed to giving the best training, that's how you reimagine, because you're going to have to also commit the time to allow these instructors to get this knowledge that they need to be able to come back and impart it out to the recruits. So for departments, I think they really have to make a commitment to training and to ensure that they give their academies the support and the funding that they need to ensure that we can pull this training off, because it's going to take a lot more than what we have. It's also going to take a lot more time. And a lot of times municipalities are hard pressed and rushed to get police officers out into the street. If I had my way, the police academy would be a year, because 6 months is an awful short amount of time to try to cram as much information and learning the things that we want our police officers to learn and to embrace. 6 months when you're in it is not enough time. It's not enough time.
Great. Well, Lisa, Superintendent, thank you very much. I think we're at the end of our time. This has been an extraordinarily rich conversation, and thank you very much for spending this time with us and
Thank you
sharing
for
all your
having me.
wisdom.
And I hope I was able to shine some light or impart a little bit of good thoughts on police officers. You know, the vast majority of police officers in this country are great men and women. You know, they sacrifice an awful lot to make sure that people can live comfortably and safely. And the few bad apples that, you know, we see that come across nationally do not represent the hundreds of thousands of police officers that are out there on a daily basis, you know, working hard to make sure that the communities across this country are safe.
Nice post to end on, and thank you, everybody. And we're all going to clap, though you probably aren't going to hear it very much.
And Sandra, I know you'll have follow-up questions, so I look forward to talking to you again.
Good. Thank you so much,
Thank
Lisa.
you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye, everyone.